You know what they say, one person's trash is another person's treasure. Today, I want to show you how I recycle this piece and save it from the landfill. It's in perfectly good condition. Before bringing any of the furniture that you find in the trash into your home, I would do a thorough inspection. So we take all the drawers out, we're taking off the hardware, and we're doing prep as usual. Make sure you wear a pair of gloves. You never know why somebody threw that furniture out. It could have bed bugs, it could have pet urine, you never know. So the prep work is so important to do outside. Once we thoroughly inspect the piece, we're gonna do some sanding. And I bought this new Ryobi. It's a battery operated Ryobi so that I didn't have to plug it in and take out my extension cord. So we're doing an 80 grit on the base and then on the top as well. Well, my Ryobi didn't last. It only lasted about 25 minutes with a fully charged regular battery. Then I found that I have to spend $200 for a super battery so that it lasts longer, which was pretty disappointing. But I do have 2 batteries, so I could switch them out until I can get my $200 battery. But that's something to know if you're thinking about buying one of those. You have to buy the very expensive battery if you want it to sand a full piece. Now, so that we don't have to spend hours sanding the top and we don't have to use a million sanding pads, I like to use some citrus strip and get rid of maybe 1 or 2 coats. It's usually the varnish that I can remove and a little bit of the stain. So I just have a little bit of my citrus strip left. I apply it to the top and then I wrap it with some plastic wrap. Because it's only about 60 degrees or 55 degrees on this day, I have to hurry up and wrap it so that that citrus strip doesn't dry. Because if it dries, it doesn't work and it just makes a big mess. So I let that sit and then I start doing some repairs. I have a little bit of the trim missing, and when this happens, I like to take some finishing nails and use quick wood. It's an epoxy. It's like wood filler, but it's an epoxy, and I stick it to the nails. The nails are something to grip it on. So all you do is you take a little chunk of that quick wood out and knead it until it turns white. So it goes from brown to white. And then I can just shape it on the piece and it dries super, super hard like a rock. It's kind of hard to sand once it dries, but it is sandable. So I like to shape it as much as I can while it's still wet. And then my husband Joe is removing the citrus strip after about, I think we left it on for an hour. And then he uses mineral spirits to clean up any gunk on there. Now it's the next day and we're gonna sand that top, and I only need to use 120 grit, and look how much easier it comes off because I stripped a couple coats. If I had just been sitting there sanding with my 80 grit, I would have had to do a couple of 80 grits, a couple 120 grits, then 150 grit. It's just, for me, so much easier to citrus strip the top and then go ahead and sand. And then we have these surface prep sanding pads for the mouse to do the trim, so we don't damage the trim. But it did take a really long time with those, so he did end up putting 120 grit on the trim to finish it. And then he's going in with his Dixie Belle's white lightning cleaner to clean the base of the piece because it's pretty messy and it was outside. Once that's done being cleaned, we bring it inside and I use my Ryobi for a couple minutes and sand that epoxy. Now this little trim was falling off. I could have probably used my air nailer to nail it in, but I thought, you know, let's remove it and give this more of a more updated look. So all I needed to do was sand off some of that glue and the uneven surface. And then I use my Dixie Belle mud to fill in any of the cracks or gouges that are left because I want my surface to look so smooth. And once the mud is dry, I come back. It's about an hour later. I sand it nice and flush. Now I need to add a primer. So I'm using Dixie Belle's Bonding Primer, which is an adhesive primer and a stain blocker, you know, bleed through tannin primer. It's a blocker. Now with this one, you apply one coat, wait 2 hours, and then you have to wait 24 hours in between coats before applying your paint. And that's because it's going to really, it needs to sit on there for a while. The longer it sits on there, the better coverage you're gonna have for your bleed through. And I know I'm gonna have bleed through on this piece because of all those knots. Now my next step, I chose the color Tide Pool using silk paint. It's a all-in-one paint. It has a primer in it already and a sealer in it, but I like to seal it because I like a satin sealer, so I will actually seal over this. And I only use 2 coats of the Bonding Boss. This is going to be a huge knots. If you have knots in your wood, they are going to bleed. Like it might take a year for them to come out, but they will bleed. So the more coats of primer that I can use on this piece, the better. I go back and forth between using my roller for the really flat, long surfaces, and then I use my synthetic brush for any of the creases. Now, if you just, I wanted to show you in real time that if you just use a little bit of paint and you take your time with that roller, you're not gonna have those orange peel marks. Orange peel marks look like, it looks like the sponge on there. And while that's not a horrible thing, you could actually get even more smooth finish if you just take your time and brush out those strokes. And if you wait 2 hours in between applying your first coat of paint before applying your second, this paint self-levels. I really love this paint when I'm using solid colors. So you just have to kind of, you know, follow the rules. Don't paint it within an hour because maybe it hasn't self-leveled all the way yet. Wait the 2 hours. It's totally worth it. And again, when I'm using my brush, I take my time. I don't overwork this paint, but I'm kind of working it smooth. I'm making sure that everything looks smooth. If I just glob it on, it's gonna look globby, so don't glob it on. My best advice for this is to take your time and enjoy the process. If you feel like you're getting a little bit, if it's getting brush strokes or I don't know, you're having a tough time, a tiny bit of water on your brush, just kind of spritz, might help. You don't want to use a lot of water if you're using this as an all-in-one. If you're priming it, if you're using it as the primer and you didn't prime your piece with something else, then you don't want to water it down. If you're not sealing with another sealer over it, you don't want to water it down. But a tiny bit of water is okay. Now, if I took the tape off and there was a little bit of bleed through from my paint, so it's fine. I'm just taking my sander and sanding that back off. And even on the trim, when I got a little bit of paint on there, I haven't stained it yet, so I can still take my sander and just sand any of the paint off. Now to stain the wood, I'm using Dixie Belle's Voodoo Gel Stain in White Magic. This is water-based and you can see through it, so we're still going to be able to see that beautiful grain through it. I love this because it's really user-friendly. It's easy to use, and I think the white is going to go really well with the paired with the Tide Pool. And I only apply one coat on the entire piece, so that was really simple, really ideal. I'm using my rag and I'm just making sure that everything looks even. So I rub it until it looks even. I don't want any spots where it's like really white or spots where it's just uneven. So that's pretty much the trickiest part, and it's not that tricky. The white does want to sit on top of the knots, which I don't mind because I don't want to see the tannins from those knots anyway, so if any of the tannins do end up coming out, then I think that white is going to combat it a little bit or camouflage it. And if I get any of this stain on the tide pool, then I just use a little bit of water and I can remove it. It's not like it's stained or it's gonna do anything bad. Because it's water-based, it's so easy to remove. So that's another reason I really like it. Now to seal the piece, I'm using Dixie Belle's Clear Coat in Satin. And as usual, I'm using my sprayer. I just love the way that the sealer goes on with the sprayer. It looks so nice and professional. And I do 3 coats on the top and 2 coats on the base. And then I have this gorgeous new hardware from Amazon. It's a little bit of, I think it's called Champagne Bronze. I will link them in the description box below, but they're so pretty. I'm actually gonna use them on another project pretty soon, my next project. And just a reminder, this is the piece that I found in the garbage. And here's what it looks like today. I'll say, I think the trash to treasure makeovers are my favorite because I feel like, you know, I'm doing something good for the environment by saving this piece from sitting in a landfill somewhere. It's gonna get many more years of use out of it now. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing, and I will see you next time.